Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back from Christmas break. Thank you for being with us today. We have wonderful presentations today and always wonderful presenters. What I'd like to start by saying is we just finished a cultural holiday and now we have another cultural feast right before us today as we welcome 4 members of our Thiel community who bring new life and enthusiasm every day to all that they do. We have the privilege of having 2 faculty members today and 2 students, so it's a perfect balance. Our first presenter is Dr. Lana Kulik, who is in her 2nd year here in the Media, Communications, and Public Relations Department, and who kicked off our 2017-2018 Thiel Forums in September with a presentation she gave on protest communication in the age of Trump. Today she will talk to us about a 3-week intensive course she took in June on international public relations at the American University of Central Asia in Kyrgyzstan. I'm proud to present my colleague, Dr. Kulik, who will examine the fallout of a major international incident of miscommunication around a Facebook post. Dr. Kulik.
So the title of this paper is Chuchuk-Gate, and the gate part will tell you probably how significant it was for the international discussion that it created around this particular case. I did talk about this case on my summer research break to Kyrgyzstan, so I collected a lot of data, talked with a lot of people who were both witnesses and kind of indirect participants of this case, experts, journalists, and other people, and I'm going to present to you what I have learned from this. So just to kind of warm you up and gear you toward the discussion, people eat strangest things, right? In different parts of the world, you will find foods that you would never normally try if you are here in this culture. So here is just a picture from this new show. I don't know if you're watching James Corden. He has a segment on his show which is titled Spill Your Guts or Feel Your Guts. So if you don't answer his question, you are supposed to eat one of those strangest foods from all over the world that are offered on that table at that particular moment. And one of them is bull penis, right there. So, and I'm kind of telling you about this because this directly relates to my case, which is not even, it's kind of like a semantic confusion that came out of the case, but I want you to bear that in mind. People eat strangest things, including bull penises in some parts of the world. So the case started on the New Year's Eve in 2016, when a Scottish subcontractor to a joint venture in Kyrgyzstan, which is a gold mine in Kyrgyzstan, posted this particular post there on the right. So it says, "Fantastic Hogmanay feast thanks to Brand de los Santos," which is a cook or chef on the Kumtor mining facility. The Kyrgyz people queuing out the door for their special delicacy, the horse's penis. And he put just several snapshots of people having food, just a New Year's Eve dinner, and kind of forgot about it. So it was on the 31st of December. The 1st is a national holiday, nothing happened. Everything fell out on the 2nd. But before that, before telling you what actually happened there, I need to make, a disclaimer here. Chuchuk, which is at the center of this case and depicted right here, this is chuchuk, is a horse meat sausage. It's not penis, has nothing to do with penis. It's a regular sausage like you would make pig sausage or beef sausage. It's just made out of horse meat. And of course, there are ethical considerations in different parts of the world. Do you eat horses? Why do you eat horses? Kyrgyz people have to deal with that a lot. But because this is a nomadic culture, they have their own justifications for why they eat horses. They do, and they're not alone. The Kazakhs, some of the nomadic tribes like Mongolians, for example, sometimes eat horses. And in the Western civilizations, French eat horse meat, if you didn't know that. So nothing unusual about that. at least in that culture. But the thing here, the horse's penis, made a lot of people in Kyrgyzstan really, really angry. So what happened afterwards was like a international detective or a thriller, whatever you want to call it in that particular genre. So the post immediately went viral. All over Kyrgyzstan, spilled over to the international community. Some people thought it was just a stupid joke by someone who doesn't understand what the local culture is and what that particular Kyrgyz delicacy, chuchuk, is really about. Some people thought that, got really angry and thought that was a deliberate insult to the Kyrgyz culture and its traditions. So on January 2nd, about 1,300 employees of Kuntur, that gold mining base where McFeet was working, went on strike. And they demanded that the Kyrgyz government starts an investigation into this case according to Article 299, which is the incitement of ethnic hatred and violence, punishable by law up to 3 to 5 years. So here you have a potential threat to an international expat who is working for a joint venture company in Kyrgyzstan on a shift basis. It was, I think, his second shift. They would usually spend like 6 to 7 months and then rotate and go out and the new shift comes in. So it was his second tour, so to say, in Kyrgyzstan. And here he is experiencing this incredible fallout from a regular celebratory post on Facebook that he wanted to, share with the whole world as a celebration of New Year's and the local culture, and did not have a clue of how people would look at it. So it went so bad, the people who were on strike right there on the site of the mine were so angry that he had to be smuggled out in an ambulance. So this is where the detective story starts. They would not let him off the facility. They were demanding the Kuntur management to basically give him to them so that they would take him to court and put him under arrest and start this investigation. So he had to be smuggled out. And somewhere in the middle of all this, he posted this following apology. I would like to take the opportunity to sincerely apologize for the comment made on here about the Kyrgyz people and horses' penis. And again, he's using that word. I truly never meant to offend anyone, and I'm truly sorry. It was never my intention. I would also like to say the people in the picture had absolutely nothing to do with it. Again, I'm very, very sorry. So he is already realizing from the, from the fallout, from people on strike, and from the comments that he saw online, in comments to his own Facebook page, that people were really, really angry about this. And he started to understand the effect of this little post on the entire Kyrgyz community. So what happened next is best illustrated by this particular graphic from the Sunday Post, which is a British newspaper. So it reached quickly, this whole scandal quickly reached the international community. And the Sunday Post here lays out everything that happened afterwards. So this is Kyrgyzstan, if you can see it, and it's in Central Asia. And the mine itself is located in the depth of the mountains on the northern side of, on the southern side of Kyrgyz, a famous lake, Issyk, right here. So the mine is here. He had to be smuggled out from the mine to the city of Balakchi. And somewhere on the way from Balakchi to Bishkek, he got caught up, two cars, two jeeps, caught up with him, with that particular jeep that he was transferred to from the ambulance, rammed into his jeep, and basically told them, you're not going anywhere. The security people who were accompanying him at that moment ran away and told him hide. So he was hiding for about 6 hours in some abandoned warehouse in this little town of Balakchi until help arrived. And then people from Kuntur sent another car for him, delivered him to Bishkek, bought him an urgent ticket home to Scotland, and when he was boarding basically checking in for the flight next day, he saw this huge portraits of himself with the word saying wanted. So basically he was already an international fugitive. And people and the police of Kyrgyzstan could not just let him go. They took him off the flight, brought him from this destination here, from Bishkek, the capital of Kyrgyzstan, to Karakol, which is the provincial center for the entire Issyk-Kul Oblast here, or region, where the court is sitting. And there in the court, if you can imagine, in half a day, he confessed, said what I did was wrong, I apologize. They, profusely was apologizing for what he had done wrong. They recorded it on camera, broadcast to the entire nation, and basically said, okay, we are kind of forgiving you, but you're not allowed to come to our country for 10 years, I think they banned him. They shipped him out the next day. So everything happened within the first week of the New Year's on 2016. And the fallout was so incredible and so significant. And many people who I talked to were absolutely convinced that was only because of the social media. And because that message spread like wildfire around the world, and the Kyrgyz people took really deep offense with someone who does not understand their culture from the outside, offending them and saying that they're eating horse penises, basically, when in reality, it is just horse meat. So, when you analyze cases like that, and as I said, I talked to a lot of people who were witnessing and looking at it as experts. I talked with the police, with the journalists who covered this case, with sociologists and other people and public relations practitioners. And the best way to look at this case would be like, from the prism of crisis communication. But I decided to take another route, and it's all in process. I'm still writing up the case. But I'm going to look at it through the prism of this idea of circuit of culture. When you take particular messages, communicative messages, and look at them from the point of 5 movements that are engraved in and kind of encapsulated within, and how all these 5 movements interact to create a particular communicative environment that produces certain consequences. So I'm looking at the regulation, why the laws of those countries are such that you can actually prosecute someone for a Facebook post under the criminal code and send them to prison for up to 5 years if they are sentenced guilty, for example. So that is a part of regulation, how the laws in the local culture are interacting with these messages. What did that message represent, actually? For the local people, of course, it was an incredible offense. For McFeet, the originator of the message, it was just a celebratory message. He wanted to say thank you to the cook who put together that wonderful food or that table for the New Year's. Identity is playing a crucial role in this particular case. We're talking about the individual identity of McFeet as an expat, and kind of like, expats are usually, in local cultures, are looked upon with certain condescension, like you're not really here, you're coming here to reap off the benefits of the joint venture and make money and go home. You have organizational identity of Kumtor as a joint venture that is making a lot of money at the expense of local people as they think. And you also have the national identity of the country, a whole culture that took offense from a particular Facebook post. So how that interplays in the identity fusion definitely defines how that particular produced message is consumed and interpreted. So that is kind of like, my plan for the case, and I don't have time anymore to look over this in more detail, but this is what I'm kind of working on and looking at how this particular message was created, perceived, and consumed, and through all these 5 moments of cultural circuit, or circuit of culture production. Even without this, the three main lessons that can be drawn from this particular case is that issues of national identity can cut into production of messages so deeply that in the age of social media, it can produce waves all around the world. This case became internationally known, and people were discussing it. And it was so quirky, and at the same time so interesting that it really is worth looking at as the case of identity clashing with certain perceptions of people outside that identity in the world. We also need to talk about the importance of cultural sensitivity. If McFeet was trained to be a little more sensitive in that particular culture, and if he was kind of geared toward how you communicate about local culture, what they eat, what their traditions are, and to treat them with a little more respect, that probably wouldn't have never happened. And finally, the issue of social media policies for multinational corporations like Kuntor are also rising here. Do you allow your, for example, employees to post from the workplace? Can you foresee the consequences that may fall out from that? And how do you all deal with that? And of course, I don't have time to talk about how Kuntor actually, the company itself, reacted to this entire case, but it was not pretty. It was actually very ugly. And in the end, he had to take down the post. The apology is still there if you're interested in this. And he is largely kind of under the radar. He does not really post a lot on Facebook. So it was a lesson for him individually as well, that social media can be devastating for a person as well. Okay.
Time for one question for Dr. Kulik. Anybody?
Yes.
When I was living in China, I had donkey meat several times. It's quite tasty. I don't know what part of the donkey it was.
Probably what is called flack.
Yeah, I think so.
In China, they do serve penises of various animals.
Yeah, that's what I said from the beginning. Bull penis is, if you watch that clip that I referenced in the presentation, Jimmy Kimmel actually eats bull penis. He's very brave in that sense, and he says, oh, it's chewy. That was his reaction to that. It's just chewy. It takes time to kind of chew it up and swallow.
Thank you, Dr. Kulik. That was so fascinating. And of course, we're always concerned about the words that we use in our own language, and that kind of precision is just wonderfully displayed there. Thank you very much. Our next presenters, we have two, are Camille Radford, a senior English major with minors in international studies and public relations, and Crystal Durochko, a senior political science and philosophy major with minors in international studies and legal studies. As friends and roommates, they've co-authored a book titled Cookies and Cream Poetry, and today they will discuss their poems and how their writing enables them to create a support system and an appreciation of diversity. I'm very proud to present our students, Camille and Crystal. And I just want, while they're coming up here, if anybody here is from Professor Oakes's class, accounting class, there's a sign-up sheet here for you. Yes. Okay. Or maybe afterwards, and then I'll just leave it right here. And you can, okay.
Okay, I'll press the button. Okay, so I'm Camille. Dr. Hall already gave our introduction, so I won't introduce myself again. So I'm going to read for you a poem that I wrote last year. My fear of trees, from fruit to reality. Fears are a result of past trauma. My fears are carried in the breeze of trees. They scream a mournful song on days with no sun. Shade makes no escape for some fruit, becoming crow's food, begging to finally drop. begging to break free of these horrible roots? Will I always have this fear of trees? I'm stuck in the past, you see. Walking under a tree, I lose my shadow to those trees by the sway of their branches. They are trying to snatch me, to brand me with their history. Others see me flinching at the sight of tortured trees, not understanding why their branches lean. Leaning when I am told to stand strong, but raising my hands can't save me. Poplar trees are branded by these southern fruit. Trees are supposed to be a sign of new life, but I see the shapes their shadows consume. Shadows shedding light on my present day fight, life. My fears will always be understood by some. My sympathy for the fruit that used to hang here, my heart breaks as my fears resonate. Trees have become something great. Greatness. How do these trees grow under such sensitive weight, shedding their shadows over land founded on hate? When will I find beauty in the things I hate? I am the product of such strange fruit.
Hi everyone, I'm Crystal, and I'm going to be reading a poem entitled Being Poor. Pretty straightforward. Forewarning, there is some foul language in here. I was writing it down and trying to take some of it out, but I swore a lot, so I'm sorry. I took out as much as possible. Okay. Being poor is growing up in an extreme fixer-upper, learning how to tar a roof and lay brick all before 12. Being poor is crawling into that wooden box to get coal for the fire. Being poor is celebrating deer season and everyone helping to butcher. Being poor is listening to mom cry at night. Being poor is dad being laid off again. Being poor is always going to Goodwill, before Macklemore made it cool. Being poor is starches, lots of starches. Being poor is when you stop going out on Fridays. Being poor is when you bring a $1 fan for show and tell, not a Barbie. Being poor is watching your mom get sick and knowing she has no house insurance. Being poor is a broken family. Being poor is always having messed up teeth while all the other kids got braces. Being poor is slowly realizing your place in the world. Being poor is 2 small family vacations that together equal less than a week over 20 years. Being poor is watching your mom go into debt to a college that is taking advantage of her, and then watching her not being able to finish. Being poor is watching dad relearn new skills at 50 just to get by. Being poor is going without meals in silence so your family doesn't feel bad. Being poor is getting free lunches at school, then hearing the other kids complain about the lazy poor people getting free lunches. Being poor is not getting the free breakfast so they don't single you out anymore. Being poor is outcasting yourself because that's how you feel. Being poor is taking your hard-earned paycheck in high school and buying groceries, not saving. Being poor is wanting to drop out because your grades are already low. What's the point? Being poor is being underweight, and when I start to eat right, feeling guilty about it. Being poor is telling your mom you don't like using the food stamp card and then immediately regretting it for the rest of your life. Being poor is not buying groceries without glares. Being poor is living without clean water sometimes. Being poor is knowing people that don't have running water, that live in shacks. Being poor is feeling guilty for going to college. Being poor is feeling guilty for that sheets run at college. Being poor is getting a scholarship to study abroad and then feeling guilty about it. Being poor is never feeling like I deserve any of this. Being poor is a life-shaping title that I will never quite lose. Being poor is always tipping your server because your mom was a server and I remember rolling coins. Being poor is explaining the 2008 recession to a girl in college because she didn't know about it. Being poor is finding my voice and never shutting the fuck up. Being poor is being that libtard feminazi trailer trash bitch because I will be damned if I don't at least disrupt the poverty cycle. I will not apologize for who I am. I will not forget my roots in Rust Belt, rural Western Pennsylvania, because it is my dream to help the Rust Belt. Yes, this education is liberating me, and yes, it is imprisoning me in debt beyond comprehension. And yes, I know what is at stake if I fail. That is just being poor. Sorry once more for the language. Those were actual words that were used against me, so I thought they were fair game. Okay, so why are we doing all of this? So it did start kind of just like as an idea in our heads, and we're like, oh, this is cool, maybe we should do it. We brought it up, and then like we kind of have it on the back burner, and then this opportunity came along and reignited it for us. So now we're going to explain why we thought this would be such a cool project to begin.
So we said, why? To show different life experiences of college roommates, because we've been roommates for going on 3 years now. I forget how old I am sometimes.
It's
Yes,
okay.
it's been 3 years now, so.
Yeah, and we have also faced different struggles, and these struggles define how we address adversity and diversity. So we've both lived very different lives. I'm from rural America, she's from an urban area, so we are different in many ways, and our outlooks and the things we faced have really pushed us to be who we are.
So one thing that we really wanted to accomplish was female poets sharing successes and working together to support and uplift one another instead of competing against each other. So one thing that I know both of us really wanted to highlight is that we both have successes in our academic lives and in our personal lives. And our goal is to uplift each other and try to be there and be a supportive system for each other. So in this poetry book, our poems are going to kind of reflect our view of society.
And something we want to do to help create the support system is discuss our struggles. So this helps foster understanding and appreciation of differences because we both face the same pain, but different things have caused it.
So we're not really sure how this book is going to actually become a book that you can hold in your hand and flip through.
Ask me.
Perfect. Any questions is on the next one?
Yeah.
So I think, like she said before, this course gave us the opportunity to present what we would like to happen and how we should go about that. We will be asking you for that later.
Yeah. So like I said, the forum kind of brought this back to the forefront. It was kind of like an idea. Everyone kind of thinks, oh, I should write a book. But it's kind of like just an idea. And then I said, hey, we like poetry. Do you want to make a poetry book? And Camille said, yeah. But then we're friends, so I'm not going to be like every week, where's your poems? Where's your poems? So we kind of just let it go to the wayside because we're not going to be pushing each other back and forth. And with this forum, it kind of was like, okay, now we actually have something that's forcing us to condense our ideas, which is great.
Questions or comments?
Anyway.
Yeah.
Well, then just comment and thank you for sharing your poems with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for listening. We appreciate it.
Just curious, how was it having Natasha T. Miller back in light of your love for poetry?
I feel like it was helpful because I got to ask her a couple of questions and just to give me a view on how I should publicize my poetry. I feel like I didn't ask her too much about her book that I know she's working on, but just how we say our poetry and the emotion behind it and what it means to me to write a poem. And it's I write really long poems, so it's ironic that I write a short one today.
Yeah.
But my poems are usually really, really long, but I think one thing that I learned from her was to write shorter poems. So that's a goal personally for me, is to write small poems. But it's going to be a challenge because I write long poems.
Yeah. I also feel like for me, I didn't really ask her any questions. I just observing from a distance, and then if I have something I really want to know, I would ask. But for me, a lot of my poetry is pretty sad poetry. You probably noticed that. If you're at the reading, you heard some of it. And something that from having her here last year to this year kind of pushed me to write down the stuff that's hard to write about, the very real stuff, because her poems are all very real and they discuss issues that I think no one wants to talk about. So for me, I kind of felt the urge to open up and discuss the things that aren't maybe as pretty. So
Thank you.
thank you.
I guess what I appreciate, I love your poems, so thank you for doing that. What I really appreciate is, I teach British literature, and we know about Wordsworth and Coleridge, and they were also very good friends, but Wordsworth took over the book and didn't really let his friend Samuel Taylor Coleridge put anything in his book of lyrical ballads. So I really appreciate the fact that our young women are complimenting each other here, and not only that, but they're holding each other up for support. And I just think that's wonderful. That's not always easy to do. There's that competitive spirit that takes over, certain demands that you place on your partner, but you're not doing that, and I really applaud you for that. That's great.
It's a good experience for our friendship also.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the only time, we get along pretty well except for like, you know, if I open the blinds or I ask her to do the dishes.
But I don't like dishes. It's not my favorite chore. I like to mop and vacuum.
Yeah, that's almost exclusively actually. So something interesting, like for some of the concepts we were considering, we were discussing like creativity. So this is blue. I know it's really sad poem, so why do we have a blue background? It's because this is like sort of the color we'd like the cover of our book to be. And Camille very specifically said she wants a really cute cookie and a really cute glass of milk with a little face on it because that's just what she envisions. So this whole like
blue background.
Yeah, we
so
haven't.
If you haven't picked up on it, I'm the cookie and she's the cream. So.
Wait, what?
Yes.
No, it's because sometimes she'll call me like Milky, like that's her nickname.
Yeah.
Sometimes she has a lot of nicknames, but so it kind of just came from that sense that she also loves cookies.
I do.
So it kind of worked
I
out.
like to bake.
And so we've had like some creative discussions about trying to make it mesh together well.
And one thing that's really, I guess, challenging for Crystal is, like she said, she writes a lot of sad poems. So, or they're just kind of, they're dark. So I asked her yesterday, I said, read me a happy poem. And I was like, okay. It started off really happy and it kind of did a figure eight. And it was like happy, questionable, sad, depressing, like happy, maybe. And I was like, so maybe try to write a happy poem. And she's like, okay. Because I wasn't very happy when you finished, but I agree with her that a lot of our poems are a harsh reality.
Yeah.
Like mine is about slavery and how I see trees sometimes and I kind of freak out, just every once in a while. It's usually during the summer. But I feel like it's a reality for me, and being poor is a reality for her. So just so that way other women of color and not of color can see that these are struggles that we have, but we are supporting together. So
Yeah, solidarity.
yes.
When you publish it and I buy one, will you sign it for me?
My signature is a work in progress, but
We'll
yes.
work on it. We'll start practicing tonight.
That's great.
Any more questions or comments?
I liked it.
I'm especially grateful to Camille and Crystal. They really did this on very short notice. We found out that Dr. Melissa Borjaski was not able to present today due to some medical complications she had. Said the last minute, our two young women stepped up here and just did a fantastic job. So for any students or faculty member who would like to do these in the future, please let me know. These are great opportunities. Our final presenter today is our Associate Professor of Chemistry, Dr. Chris Dynasty. Dr. Stanisky, who has been at Thiel since 2010 already, will speak to us today on electrons, photons, plasmons, oh my, on Sabbatical, studying surface science, and addresses some of the interesting projects he worked on during his 16-17 sabbatical experience. I'm very proud to present my colleague, Dr. Stanisky.
Okay, let's get this loaded up real quick, I guess. And, okay, so thanks for the invitation. So I'm a professor in the chemistry department, and I spent a year on sabbatical last year, which gave me a really great opportunity to explore my interests. So the next 20 minutes or so might either be inspirational, and you'll be recruited to take some science classes, because I don't see too many science majors in here, or you're gonna walk out of here and wish you had the next 20 minutes of your life back. Because I might make this a little too overwhelming for you, right? No, but I think I cut out a lot of the really overwhelming stuff, and I'm just gonna highlight some of the general things I've studied. I won't go into nearly as much of the data that I acquired. I'll try to give an overview of what I've studied it and why I wanted to study it, and things like that. So, anyways, I will say that I went to a small college like this myself, and never imagined that I would become a scientist. I thought I was really, and still am very interested in ancient history. And I don't think it was till halfway through graduate school that I started to realize just how thankful I was that I started to study science and didn't throw in the towel when the times got tough, and I almost threw in the towel a couple of times. But I'm so incredibly thankful that I didn't, because God, he's just so amazingly insightful and had such incredibly cool perspectives about the world that I would have completely missed had I not followed through. Anyways, what I have pictured here, okay, so that's a really bad cartoon of me that I drew when I was in graduate school, and I've overused a lot. And so on the right-hand side here is a picture of a representation, not of the exact work I did at the University of Pittsburgh while I was there this past year. But basically what is here is a solid surface with some molecules bound to the solid surface, irradiated with some light, and ejecting some electrons as a result of the interaction with that light. And over here, this is relevant. Doesn't seem like it's that relevant. And I'll talk about plasmons in a second. And so, okay, anyways, let's see if this works. Okay, so what were my goals for my sabbatical? Like most things in life, I wanted to learn something new. I wanted to learn something new. I had never studied surface science and the various experiments I did as a graduate student and a postdoc, but it always fascinated me. I picked it as the topic of my qualifying exam when I was a graduate student, and then of course some of the work I did later as a postdoc has some surface implications, but I didn't really have any formal training in surface science, and I wanted to get some. So, and the other thing is, right, it would be great if I could get a couple publications to make my grant proposals a little more competitive, because I'd really like to do surface science here at Thiel, not just once every so many years when I go on sabbatical. And in order to do that, it requires us to buy some relatively complex and expensive equipment. And so in order to get those funds, I need to write some proposals, and in order to be competitive when you write proposals, you have to generally have some evidence that you've done something like that before. So anyways. Okay, so the plan, it didn't actually go according to plan, but it turned out to be a lot of worthwhile experiences. I spent some time at the University of Pittsburgh, so I'll talk about that first. That was funded by a grant that I wrote, one of the few grants I've actually gotten since I've been here, but I got a grant to fund my time while I was at the University of Pittsburgh from the National Science Foundation, a really great program they have for undergraduate, or for faculty members at primarily undergraduate institutions. I worked with Dr. Ervolia Patek at Pitt in the physics department. I'm a chemist, and he was actually trained as a physical chemist, but his research sort of transitioned a little bit into the area of physics, and so he's in the physics department. And I also worked for a few months at Syracuse University with Dr. Gianfranco Verdali, who also happens to be in the physics department, but his work, he's a physicist, but he's sort of morphed into more of a chemist. So anyways, it's interesting. Okay, so I'll talk about the stuff I did at Pitt first. So the idea, the proposal that I wrote with Dr. Patek to get the funding to support my contribution to an ongoing project that they had was to investigate how adsorbing molecules might affect the plasmonic enhancement of photoemission on silver atoms deposited on the surface of TiO2. So I'll have to unpack that for you as time goes on. But TiO2 is a relatively well-known semiconductor, and it's got some really great potential applications in solar energy conversion, so that's one of my really big passions. I'm of the very strong opinion that it is an incredible privilege that we get to be human beings. And not only do we get to be human beings, but we get to be human beings in an environment that allows us to arrive at an incredible appreciation for our surroundings. There are, this stat haunts me, and I use it in my introductory chemistry classes often. There are 4% of the world's population that gets the privilege of earning a higher education. A privilege, might not seem like a privilege now, right? Like all this work that you're enduring and all that stuff seems like it's just more of a chore than anything else. But at the end of the day, hopefully you'll see that it's a privilege. And the take-home message behind that stat is that for every 4 people that get the privilege, there are 96 other human beings on this planet. 96 others that would probably give anything for the privilege. Anything. Right? Because the right and the access to education is precious and is liberating and is empowering. Anyways, I look at this as such an incredible privilege to have had the educational opportunities that I have had, and I am so thankful that I'm a scientist and I get to appreciate this amazing natural world that we get to experience. And I get almost distraught when I think about the myriad ways that we're sort of ruining it by our actions, right? And so solar energy conversion is a really passionate topic for me because I really think it's a pathway to the future. We have to figure out a way to do this. In only a fraction of a day, a little more than an hour actually. I got this wrong the other day when I was talking to the students. In only a little more than an hour, the sun irradiates the planet with sufficient energy. Ready for this? In only a little more than an hour, the sun irradiates the planet with sufficient energy to provide the entire world's energy demands for an entire year. It only takes an hour. It only takes an hour. And I feel like, and you've heard me tell this joke before too, but everyone else hasn't, I feel like when I hear that, at least, maybe not you, but I feel like when I hear that, the universe is standing right next to me, or humanity in general, holding a baseball bat and hitting us upside the head with it as hard as he possibly can, saying, listen, bozos, I've given you everything you need. Everything. Stop wasting your time and energy and money mining these fossil fuels out of the earth and pumping the atmosphere full of all this pollution. Stop wasting your time. I've given you everything you need. Just reinvest your efforts and your money and you'll have it. We have to figure this out. We have to. It's our responsibility, right? It's not just an opportunity, it's our responsibility. We have to do this. We have to find a way to harness the sun's energy. And so I had to be a part of it. And I went on sabbatical to try to do that and make a small contribution. So TiO2 is one of those materials that has great potential for photovoltaic devices that could potentially harness the sun's energy. And the work that Dr. Pedas and I proposed would give some interesting insight into the mechanisms that the energy is harnessed and then passed along and stored and used and so on and so forth. So before I can tell you a little bit about that, I have to give you a small course, a crash course in quantum mechanics. It won't be too agonizing, I promise, I hope. Electrons are subatomic particles. They comprise atoms in addition to some other things, right? But they're such fascinating little things, It took us a long time as a species to understand them very well. First of all, to know that they exist, but then second of all, understand them and be able to explain them. And quantum mechanics is that field of physics and chemistry that we describe the behavior of these bizarre things. They're unlike anything we ever experience in our daily lives. This is my favorite one that can sort of walk through walls, right? They're not bound by the same laws of nature that you and I are. I gotta go a little faster. Okay, so anyways, this is a simple model of an atom. So embarrassingly simple that I almost didn't draw it. But electrons sort of surround the nuclei. They have discrete energy levels available to them. Here's a simple way to think about it, right? When I live in this potential energy field, just like you, this gravitational potential energy field, I can arbitrarily change my energy in it, changing my height, right? There's no sort of discrete steps, right? I can climb a staircase, for example, by, if I do it in slow motion, gradually raising my height and gradually climbing, right? Electrons can't do that. They're either on the ground floor or on another floor. There's no in between, right? They go from one energy state to another. They can't exist in between them. How do they get from one energy state to another? They have to absorb some energy, the energy that corresponds to that difference. Of course, that energy can't just be energy, right? Maybe it's not sufficiently energetic to promote us to N2, so it just passes on through, right? And there's no matching condition. On the other hand, maybe another type of photon, maybe blue light is sufficiently energetic, and when the electron absorbs that photon, boom, it jumps up there, right? And now it exists in the higher energy state. When it's there, it can come back down. How does it do that? Well, it emits the quantity of energy that it absorbed, and it drops down to the lower energy state. It could also absorb a sufficiently high energy photon that it gets completely ejected altogether. Right? And it skips all of the higher energy levels and gets ejected out of an atom. But I do want to focus on one thing. I want to focus on this excited state, when it's promoted from the ground to the excited state, because that's where all of the magic happens that I'm going to talk about today. The lifetime of the state, it can be really small. It doesn't exist for a very long time at all. It's incredibly interesting if you want to study it, but you got to have a really tricky experimental technique to study it, because it doesn't last very long. A tiny fraction of a second, tiny, a femtosecond, 10 to the minus 15 seconds, 10 to the minus 15. That's a decimal point with 14 zeros and then a 1. It's a tiny fraction of a second. That's how long some of these things last. But they're sort of the key, right? They're sort of the key for us to understand how we can engineer better devices to harness the sun's energy. So that was an isolated atom. I didn't study isolated atoms. I studied TiO2, which is a metal. It's a semiconductor. It has lots of atoms that comprise it. And lots of electrons. And we have lots of these atoms next to one another. Instead of having discrete energy levels, you have bands of closely spaced energy levels separated by a gap. We're going to call it the band gap. But same idea. An electron in the valence band can absorb some energy, be promoted to the conduction band. Now why is that useful? Because when that electron is in the conduction band, it can do stuff for us. We can make use of the fact that it's energized. If we have constructed an electric circuit, we can use the energy that electron absorbed to do some things like maybe charge a battery, run our computer, run a ceiling fan, whatever the case may be, right? Maybe we could also use it to power an automobile. So if we can find a way that we can generate these energetic electrons in the conduction band, well, we have to be careful because they can also relax, right? They can come back down, they can emit that energy just like in the atomic state. So it can be a short-lived state. We have to understand the mechanisms by which that electron can relax back to the ground state. We have to understand all those channels that excited electron might go away, right? All those channels by which it might go away, because we want to harness the energy that it's stored. It's stored in that particular electron when light shines on it. Okay. So what that means is that we have to have a really sensitive technique to focus on the process involved in the absorption and maybe the potential emission of light whenever the electron changes these allowed energy states. Of course, the ultimate goal is to engineer new devices that can harness energy and we can make use of it. Now I was sort of telling a fib, actually, and most students don't even realize this, even if they major in chemistry or physics, but there can be virtual states, right? You can actually have a situation where an electron goes from the valence band to the conduction band up in here. This is sort of a bad drawing, but it can go either by maybe an intermediate state here, Or, look, this guy doesn't go to a state. It's sort of in no man's land. But if these two photons that it absorbs impinge on the sample quickly enough, you can go through this virtual state and absorb these two photons. That blew my mind when I first learned that. Right? Because all along in quantum mechanics, you're told that the electron can only occupy discrete energy levels. What do you mean? It can just exist in no man's land where there's no energy level, almost in an arbitrary state, like we're told it can't exist. Right? But it happens. Okay, I'm not going to bore you too much. I'm realizing that this is probably a little esoteric, but this is called Two-Photon Photoemission Spectroscopy that they use at the University of Pittsburgh to study these really short-lived electron states. Basically, samples put into an ultra-high vacuum chamber, really low pressure, like incredibly low pressure. That is to say, almost no gas molecules at all in there. It's by itself. It's irradiated with these laser pulses to produce the excited states. If any photoelectrons are ejected, they're captured in this electron analyzer, and they're analyzed for their energy and their momentum. This is what it looks like. This is the laser system. It's probably about 12 feet long, 6 feet wide, lots of mirrors because it can be tuned through the entire visible region. That might not mean much to you, but it's an incredibly challenging scientific achievement to be able to do that. That's the vacuum chamber itself, so the laser goes into the chamber behind this hemispherical analyzer. Just another angle of it, right? The sample sort of way down, buried in there. Again, another angle of it. These are the control electronics to keep everything running smoothly. And then this is the back side of it, and there's the computer that controls those control electronics. And there's the sample down in there. Right? If you look through one of these windows, you see that tiny little 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter square, where the TiO2 is, and on which any other atoms or molecules will be deposited with incredible precision and control. When you deposit silver on TiO2, there's some interesting consequences that happen. A new state arises. It's called this interface state that can be populated with electrons. It doesn't exist for the silver on its own or the TiO2 on its own. When light enters the system, the silver plasmon can be excited. What is a plasmon? Remember that cartoon I had with those people sort of line dancing? A plasmon is a collective, an excitation of the collective motion of more than one electron. And again, I'm not going to bore you with too many of those details, but the point is that it gives rise to some incredibly enhanced photoemission. So as the silver coverage increases, this is the number of photoelectrons generated upon the emission, irradiation of two photons in quick succession. So as it gets sort of bluish through the colors to red, there's more and more silver. And what's plotted here is the number of photoelectrons generated. So there's a lot of photoelectrons generated as more and more silver is deposited on the TiO2, indicating that there's a strong interaction between the light that impinges on the sample, interacts with those electrons in the silver metal, excites those plasmons, which can then transfer some electron density to the TiO2. And the second photon ejects the electrons, and it's analyzed by the electron analyzer. So here's another picture of the wavelength dependence of this, what's known as the interface state, right? So here it is here. This is sort of 450 is way out in the red, doesn't quite excite it, but then you get into lower wavelengths, higher energies, the interface state gets excited, and then way down into the UV, it's basically one photon photoemission down there. We were interested in seeing whether we put other molecules onto the silver and TiO2, how that might affect the photoemission yields. And it turns out that it was sort of the opposite effect that we expected. Here we have, from red to blue, increasing amounts of water absorbed on a sample with silver and TiO2, and the photoemission actually goes down. indicating that the water is sort of suppressing whatever energy absorption and therefore electron emission is taking place on the irradiation of the light. We think it was probably actually because it's really difficult to control how the silver goes on to the TiO2. If it forms nanoparticles, then we would have expected to see an enhanced plasmonic photoemission. But we tend to think that whatever the way we were making the samples, that the silver was going on in a layer, and then the water's going and depositing on top of the layer, rather than forming as a capping agent around the nanoparticles. Unfortunately, I ran out of time because we had some ideas to anneal the sample in such a way that we could form silver nanoparticles instead of just layers. I'm sure that work has continued since I left. Yeah, so anyways, that's the work that we did with silver and TiO2, and I don't know if that made any sense to you at all. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. So this is the postdoc and the graduate student that I worked closely with while I was there. I know I'm sort of going over, so I'll talk about the stuff at Syracuse here just real fast. This is really easy to do. So I spent some time in Syracuse in February and March of last year, in the middle of winter, and it is cold and snowy in Syracuse, no doubt about it. I was actually sort of, at the time I was training for my second marathon, and man, that was a challenge. More often than not, I felt like I was skiing instead of jogging as I was, training. Definitely got a lot of snow there. But here was the physics building. It's a beautiful campus, beautiful library, beautiful chemistry building, really just amazing facilities. When I was there, I studied some astrochemistry. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I'm already going too long. But another one of my really strong interests that's also relevant to surface science is studying the chemistry that happens in outer space, and in particular the chemistry that happens and is catalyzed by small solid surfaces in outer space. This is a really cool website that updates almost weekly with new astronomical discoveries made. And by that I mean new molecules discovered. They've got a molecule of the month section. Here's some really crazy cool exotic molecules. If you're not a chemist, you might not be able to appreciate just how cool some of these are, like argon bound to a hydrogen with a plus. It's been observed in the interstellar medium. Incredibly cool to think about that. Like argon making a bond? What? Nobody got it. Anyways. They did. I know they did. Come on now. High five. All right. Okay, so the goal behind the field of astrochemistry is to explain the abundance and the origins of these exotic molecules. But also to explain some things that seem like they should be incredibly simple to explain. The most abundant molecule in the universe, hydrogen, we still don't have a good explanation for how molecular hydrogen forms. It doesn't happen in the gas phase. There's no way it can happen in the gas phase. Right? There's no activation energy. Right? So when the two molecules, the two atoms collide, H plus H, they can absolutely form a bond, but as soon as that bond forms, it falls apart because it's a very exothermic reaction. And there's nothing to take away the energy that would be released when that bond forms. You need sort of a third body to collide with them and carry away that energy. But outer space has an even greater vacuum than any of those vacuum chambers that we have here on Earth. Right? There's nothing else there to take away that energy, so the molecule immediately falls apart. And so for a long time, scientists were puzzled by how can we explain the chemistry that seems to happen essentially in the gas phase out there when it doesn't quite add up to the thermodynamic predictions. And it turns out that in the past couple of decades, solid-state chemistry has played a big role in explaining abundances of molecules in outer space because there's a lot of dust grains that float around out there. And the molecules can accrete on the dust grains, and solid surfaces are very catalytic and can help chemical reactions take place very efficiently. Oh, I forgot to leave some things out here. What's fascinating about this is that in meteor impact sites here on this planet, there are lots of really fascinating molecules that you'll find. Prebiotic molecules, things like sugars and amino acids and lots of other things. And it's like, why did these molecules for life? why are they found in these impact sites here on this planet? Right? That's an interesting question. Ooh. Just a couple of years ago, a comet passed by, comet Thiel 2, looks like wild, but it's German. And one of our satellites that passed by collected some samples from the tail of this comet, and they found only 20 amino acids that are used by all life forms on this planet. We really missed an opportunity when Comet Rosetta passed by, less than a year or so ago. Anybody remember Comet Rosetta in the news? It's a shame the media missed that opportunity to educate you all. Like, it really is a shame. It's so frustrating that our media misses these opportunities to make science cool. It really does. It's such a cool thing to think about, landing a satellite on a comet that's passing by, collecting some samples and analyzing them. That's what happened. Like, that is what happened. And nobody knows that. How is it possible that nobody knows that? It's so discouraging that our media doesn't cover stuff like this. Instead, what do we cover? God, I'm not even gonna give it the time of day, the stuff that we cover in our media. So anyways, there's lots of really interesting puzzles, like why does CO2 segregate from water in outer space? First of all, CO2 is present in really small amounts, and so you would expect that even the small molecules that are present would be embedded in the matrices of the much more abundant molecules like the hydrogens and the water molecules, but it seems to segregate itself, and so there's a lot of diffusion that occurs. Even at these low temperatures of these molecules in the salts, they can move around and diffuse. Here's the apparatus that they used at Syracuse to do these studies. And I remember when I first saw this thing, I walked in, it was like the clouds parted and the sun shining through, and I was like, my God, this is awesome. I don't know if I could go back and show you the pictures of the ones in the pit lab. That lab was pretty sterile. I mean, I don't know if you noticed, it was white walls, brand new instruments that you almost looks like you shouldn't even be able to touch, right? These guys, these are real hands-on scientists. They built this from scratch. They modify it. They're not afraid to break it. What we did is we installed a helium cryostat. That took a couple weeks. That was a lot of fun because I want to build one of these, and I've got some funding to do it. And I want a helium cryostat too. I don't know if I have the funding for that, but it was fun to see how it works. This is sort of between the two beam lines that are used to deposit samples on the small solid substrate inside the chamber. This is sort of a view from above. Those are the beam lines. This is a pyrolytic source that I helped build, right? The project there wasn't so much acquiring data as it was instrument development. So we built this source to deposit atomic hydrogen, which is really hard to do. Hydrogen comes as a molecule in nature. So if you want to study the interaction of atomic hydrogen on a solid, you've got to dissociate it. And so this is a pyrolytic beam source that we built. Just another angle of it. This is a vacuum line that we built to deposit C12 CO2 and C13 CO2, and most of you probably don't know what that means, so I won't tell you. It's not that complicated, but you probably had enough, right? So anyways, a couple angles of this thing. This is a paper that they published since I left with just C12 CO2, and they keep telling me, hey Chris, you gotta come back because we want to use your vacuum, or your this thing that I made, this mixing vacuum line for C12 CO2 and C13 CO2, so we can publish a paper together on that. I'm not sure if I'm going to get to go back. I'm going to try to go back this summer. We're going to apply for some funding, but it was a lot of fun. I'll thank those guys, the postdoc, the graduate students. The Herschel Foundation provided the funding that I'm using to try to build my own vacuum chamber here. Of course, Dr. Verdali for letting me come and hang out in his lab for a while. And yeah, that's something else. I'm not going to worry about that. Thanks for your time. Hey, if there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them. Okay, go ahead.
So I had a question for the first part of your sabbatical.
Yeah.
So you said that AG and TiO2 was what you focused on. So did you figure out a way or like how you were going to use it for solar energy?
Yeah, that's a great question. I know I probably went through that way too fast. So it's TiO2 has been thought to be used in photovoltaic cells for a couple of decades, actually. And so that project that I was working on was a a small step in the direction of trying to understand the excitation and relaxation mechanisms available to the electrons whenever they're excited by the light that impinges on it, right? Ultimately, the goal would be to incorporate these things into some device that could efficiently harness solar energy and store it and allow us to make use of it later. We're still pretty far away from that, I think. But this two-photon photoemission work that Dr. Patek is doing is really shedding some great light and understanding on these really fast electron transfer reactions that happen instantaneously after the electron absorbs light. And it's only made possible by these really fast lasers that are a relatively novel technology. And so as we understand more about how to use the technology and we study more systems than just TiO2 with silver on it, and we understand these electron transfer mechanisms a little better, again, ultimately, hopefully we could design a device from the ground up. So it's one small step in the right direction, I guess. Long answer. I'm really good at giving too much information. So. Do you have a question, Matt?
I was really going to ask what Camille asked, essentially tying it back to the any future development of photovoltaic cells.
Yeah, it's still going to be a long way away, I think. And by a long way away, I mean, maybe it could be a couple of years, could be another few decades, who knows. This is just one possibility, too, right? There's lots of people working on lots of other ways to harness solar energy. And this was the closest one in the neighborhood that I could get to quickly and easily to make a small contribution, which is what I wanted to do. And of course, learn a lot, and I learned a lot, too. So, yeah, anyways.
We are indeed fortunate to have our faculty, our students who make Thiel the rich place that it is. So thank you for your attendance today. Our next Thiel Forum, I just love seeing people when they're passionate, isn't it great? Even though we might not know every single thing that people are talking about, it's just their enthusiasm, their language that they use, it's just fantastic. So thank you to our presenters today for that variety. Our next Thiel Forum will be February 15th, and we will have Thiel's Women Bikers. So we're going to have Martin Black and Professor Karen Schaefer, who will do a presentation on the 2017 Women's Bike Trek. So that should be fascinating. And we'll also have Drs. Greg Butcher and Laura Pickens, who will review their GNC summer work. So thank you again, and have some good refreshments, compliments of Dr. Franz. Thank you.